Hi, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this knowledge session of BINSWANGER ANAROCK on the Indian data center industry, where we are releasing a report on the Indian data center industry dynamics, as well as some key trends that we're expecting to see in the next few years in India. We'll also be following it up with a very engaging panel discussion with industry experts. But before we start the session, I would like to introduce you to Jeff and Anuj. Jeff Binswanger is Managing Director of Binswanger Group. Jeff joined Binswanger in 1978. He has been instrumental in advising most of the Fortune 500 companies on their real estate strategies. He has also been pivotal in the global expansion of Binswanger Group over the years. His detailed profile is on the screen. Anuj Puri, co-founder and chairman of ANAROCK Group. Anuj comes with more than 30 years of experience in the real estate market and is a veteran in India in the real estate field. Anuj set up ANAROCK in 2017 as one of its kind technology-based real estate services group. With that, I would like to call Anuj to come in and just set the context for this session.
Thank you very much, Devi. I'm very excited. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Binswanger ANAROCK knowledge session on data centers. You know, over the last couple of years, data centers in India has really witnessed a huge amount of traction. There's been a lot of activity in the industry with many large commitments announced, large commitments for acquisition of land parcels that the operators have tied up, as well as from various hyperscalers who are looking for new projects. Many of these to be in compliance with the data protection law that has come in India, which itself actually has gone through some change, having got withdrawn this month to be rewritten again. So whilst the momentum on the ground has begun, we still need to wait and watch to see the new form in which this data protection law in India will actually be framed. So there are two questions that merit discussions, which we're going to do today, which we've also covered in our report, which Devi is going to release in a little while. The first one is the data center supply growth in India and whether this supply that is coming up is in sync with the estimated demand. And the second question that we're going to debate is that the trends that we can expect from the point of view of IT professionals who are acting as data managers. So just as a brief background, you know, there are about 138 third-party co-location data centers, and currently the capacity that these 138 third-party co-location data centers have is about 737 megawatts, which really in real estate terms means about 11 million square feet of space. We believe that the capacity of this will grow nearly 2.5 times over the next 3 years. I.e. till 2025, we're going to see this 11 million square feet grow 2.5x. So in merely 3 years, what India is going to witness is what it has seen in the last 20 years, and maybe twice the size of that. So in 3 years, the growth that we are going to witness on the data centers is what we may have witnessed in India over the last 20 years and perhaps even twice of that. So we feel that the demand will more than keep up with this planned future supply. But then on the other hand, there is a huge amount of land banking that has started to happen on data centers. And there is a huge amount of sort of unplanned supply that may come into the market, which could potentially create a situation of oversupply in the market. And that is really a moot question. So, you know, the moot question is, will the data explosion that we are anticipating outstrip the data center explosion and create a more balanced market? So the data explosion that we are anticipating, can it outstrip the data center explosion that we are going to witness so that there is a more balanced market? So to discuss this, we put together a very exciting panel with industry experts who are graciously accepted to join us with their views. But before we kickstart the panel and before we release the report, I would like Jeff, a very, very dear friend of mine whom I've known for over 25 years, a great friend of our firm. He's, as Devi introduced, the owner of the BINSWANGER group, to give a welcome address to our viewers. Over to you, Jeff.
Good, thank you, Anuj. I want to thank you and Debbie and your entire team for inviting us today's session. As you know, BINSWANGER ANAROCK is one of the major real estate leaders in the world supporting enterprise companies like Apple and co-location companies like T5, EdgeCore. We also represent about 260 of the Fortune 500 in not only technology, but if you look at life science, e-commerce, aerospace, and automotive, companies like Amgen, Raytheon, Lockheed, Google, Kohler, the largest toilet company in the world, Walmart. So we have a real feel of what is happening within corporations. What are they thinking? Where are they looking? So the biggest problem we're dealing with right now is that all of us are living in a very volatile world. What's happening in China and what's happening with America and China's relationships, also what's happening in Russia. Companies are really starting to relook where they're putting their operations, and they're looking to pull out in China and looking for other areas. That's a good problem for us in the real estate business because we're creating a lot of movement, and it's a lot of excitement of what's happening with industries today. Where companies are going to relocate and where do they want to manufacture, distribute, and set up their database and technology facilities. BINSWANGER and ANAROCK's technology group focuses on renewable energy, battery, semiconductor, and data centers. So when we talk today, our expertise is across the board in technology. Today in those semiconductor, which is a little bit different what we're talking about today, is really the biggest problem we're seeing because of the shortage of chips and the push to build new factories. While automotive is really hit hard, personal computers demand is really down worldwide. So companies like Intel are cutting back, even though you hear about expansions like Ohio in the United States, where they're planning on to spend $100 billion to build 5 fabs over the next 5 years. And now that the CHIP Act has just been passed and is approved, the question is, who'll be getting that money and how fast they will proceed. But with data centers, which we're here to talk about, it still, as Anuj just said, very, very explosive, especially in Asia Pacific and in India. Experts, as Anuj just talked about, says it will double. If you look at megawatts by next year, it could be anywhere, and the experts will talk from 500 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts. But it's amazing to see the growth. And what we're seeing over here in the US, looking at India, is the movement is really on-premise data centers being moved to the cloud. Also, we see governments, for what we're looking at, is pushing for internet and penetration in more rural areas, which is attracting from the standpoint, and bottom line, the internet is growing, which means more people using, which means bigger opportunities in the data center sector for India. And a lot of people in the US and around the world are focused on the growth and what is happening in India. So if I could, maybe let's pass it on back to you, Debbie, for the report, and maybe talk about what's really happening.
Thank you, Jeff. That was very insightful. We'll proceed to the report release. I'll just quickly summarize the report. We have analyzed in this report two parts, like Anuj had mentioned earlier. One is the industry dynamics on the supply and demand side on the DC co-location space over the next 3 years. And second, what are the expected future trends as perceived by the data managers themselves across different industries? And this is coming out of a survey that we had done earlier. India has one of the highest data traffics in the world. We consume 17 GB of data per month in India today. Every user is consuming about, on an average, 17 GB per month. The data center industry in India to store all this data is currently about 5.6 billion USD. And this industry is growing at 10% annualized basis. In the last 2 years, it has grown at 10%. A quick summary of some of the key findings by us. The total building ready IT capacity of data centers in India is about 737 megawatts of IT capacity, of which 68% is sold. We expect this number to go to 1752 megawatts by 2025, which will pan approximately 24 million square feet in real estate terms. What is the demand expected to be? About 2100 megawatts as against this planned supply that is expected to come in. What is interesting is that 64% of all this future capacity will come up in Mumbai and Chennai. And if we drill down even further, 76% of this planned capacity will come up in just 6 clusters across India. On the demand side, hyperscalers like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and others are expected to follow a mix of own and operate as well as co-location data centers. It's expected to be a hybrid strategy. If we exclude the facilities that are coming up under ownership model, the demand between enterprises and hyperscalers is expected to be 65% for enterprises and 35% for hyperscalers. Banking and technology will be major off-takers amongst enterprises for DC co-location space over the next 4 years. Data managers, and this is coming from our survey, expect to follow a hybrid of data center and cloud for various applications. And bringing in operational efficiencies, cost savings, and sustainabilities, these are important objectives for IT managers going forward. With that summary, we would like to have your feedback. Please do download the report from the website of ANAROCK.com. We would love to have your feedback. And with that, we will proceed to the panel discussion. I would like to introduce the panelists over here. We have Charles Pollock, called as Chuck. He heads technology at BINSWANGER. Chuck has more than 30 years of real estate experience, and he manages the technology group at BINSWANGER. Next, we have Rucha Nanavati. Rucha is the Chief Information Officer at Mahindra Group. Rucha comes with more than 20 years of experience in the IT space, leading several large, complex transformation projects. Next, we have Seema Ambasta, CEO of the Brookfield Digital Reality Platform in India. Seema comes with more than 30 years of experience in the IT products and services space. And last but not the least, we have MP Vijay Kumar. Vijay is the CFO at SIFI Technologies since 2007. He has more than 30 years of experience. He's also an independent director in very large companies such as LIC and Geojit. I would like to welcome all the panelists to this session. And with that, I would request Anuj to come in and start this panel discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Devi. Look forward to reading that report. I enjoyed the analysis and the synopsis you gave. And thanks, Jeff, for giving that broad overview on the industrial and data center. And it's true, Jeff, what you said is that the governments are pushing internet in the rural centers of all the countries, more so in India. And that is generating demand for data centers. And hopefully there is going to be more and more requirement as the data penetration in rural part of India goes on, the data center requirement would increase. I'm going to have this exciting panel discussion over the next 45 minutes with our four esteemed panelists. I'm going to take the opportunity of asking my first set of questions to Chuck. Chuck, given that you're based out of the US, my first question is really to you. Do you think that there could be potential migration of data from developed regions like the US and Europe, given the increased focus on data residency laws, which I discussed in my opening comments, coming up in various sort of countries where the governments are mandating for data to be kept within the shores of that country?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have a map of data residency laws across the world. And interestingly, and not surprisingly, places like Europe and the United States have fairly strong laws. And as you mentioned earlier, India's laws are a little lighter than that, actually fairly light, but they're making progress and reconsidering what they have. And certainly the concern and interest about where data resides, or localization, if you want to call it that, of data, is getting a lot of discussion because it crosses all strata, from the individual worrying about where his data is and who has access to it, all the way through to the companies. Even governments obviously are concerned about this, and there's a lot of focus and attention on data management and where it resides. So my perception from what I've been reading and what I hear and what I see from discussions here in the US is that migration of data, just like migration of human resources, moves from the epicenter of where it started. You could make a parallel to a company like use Intel, where I used to work at Intel. We had most of our resources in the US, but all of our growth was international. So we had to figure out how to move the human resource to where the activity was. And data, I think, is following that same path. A lot of it is stored not locally, and that's going to happen more and more. And I think the laws will just get stronger and stronger as there's more and more attention on this.
Very interesting, Chuck, what you say is, and my second question is a part of what you said earlier. How are these large tech companies in US thinking about their data center strategies, more so with respect to Asia or India?
Well, as you and I think Jeff mentioned as well, Asia Pacific is the largest data center growth location in the world, much, I think 2 to 3 times more growth expected than in North America, for example. Some of that is because there's a much larger amount already here in North America, but that is where, as we mentioned earlier, or several people have, the growth in the internet and utilization of data is growing faster in those locales than it is here in North America. So as was previously discussed, the hyperscalers, the big enterprise companies, they will go where the demand is if it is cost effective. And I noticed one of the interesting things going on in India is that the government has reclassified data centers as infrastructure, which is a significant change, because the infrastructure in India has access to greater incentives, and even more interestingly, and more importantly, perhaps, lower cost debt than other type of sectors. So that reclassification to infrastructure, I think, also will have more impetus for these companies to grow there, because it is more cost effective. So they always chase the data. So the big players, as you mentioned, there's already significant announcements of Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft as well, growing. And as you mentioned in your report, a lot of that growth is in Mumbai and Chennai, partly because they have the most cable landing spots. So that, obviously increases the fiber capability from various regions. And then from what I understand, the expectation is that Hyderabad and Delhi would be the next major growth locations. And again, that's all demand driven. But as things move into rural areas and more activity is there, you'll see a lot more what they call edge computing, where they move the cloud and co-location activities closer to the need as opposed to these mega sites and the hyperscaler sites. So I think there'll be a permeation of edge computing as well, closer to some of these more rural locations.
Thank you, Chuck. Look forward to that edge computing coming into India. I mean, that's a word that I've heard for the first time. So I'm excited to see how that is going to get implemented in India. But you're right. At certain stage, we are going to see more and more penetration of data into rural India, and hence the data centers will need to spread beyond just Mumbai and Chennai into other cities, and perhaps into some of the tier 2 cities of India. Right. Richard, we heard Chuck speak about the importance of data, and I've been hearing that data is like the new oil. So my question, given that you are the Chief Information Officer at Mahindra Group, to you is that as an organization, how has data generation and consumption changed in your company post-COVID? And what, in your view, are the most pressing challenges that you're currently facing, on data?
Thanks, Anuj. Excellent report, by the way. Looking forward to downloading and reading it.
Thank you.
So almost every industry is going through digital transformation. And COVID has accelerated all of it, right? Exponentially, multifold, I want to say. Now, even the most conventional businesses and industries get judged by market, by how much investments you're making in digital and so on. An example is, a very, very traditional industry, which is auto. A lot of technology goes in that. No taking it away, but how if you think about a few years ago, how would you go and buy a car? You'd go into a dealership, you try it out, and then you decide whether you want to buy it or go to try another one. The fact that we booked our latest offering of car within 30 minutes, more than 1 lakh vehicles, 100,000 vehicles were booked, clearly says it's not possible that the 100,000 people test drove the vehicle, right? So the entire experience was digital. Entire experience. Find out the features of the car, the different options that were available to you. What did you want to buy? And it'll be available. I think, Jeff, you mentioned about how much automakers have been hurt by the semiconductor industry. Semiconductor shortages. So all of this was fully digital. Now, the most conventional of the businesses, when they move and become digital more and more, whether it is for employee experience, customer experience, your everyday things, operationally, on your shop floor, everything, data is bound to explode. The data generation, I think, has become exponential. Edges, as we just heard about edge computing, but the edges have exploded. The amount of things that Indians do on WhatsApp just will surpass anything else that you can think of, right, in terms of data generation. So edges have become very, very, huge generators of data. From smartphones to sensors, connected cars, appliances. I usually like to joke a little bit and say, I'm the only dumb thing left. Everything else is smart. Everything else is smart. And it is generating a ton of data, right? So, just, since we're talking about reports and numbers and so on, a report from 2021, I think October or September, it says, we create roughly 2.5 quintillion bytes of data.
Wow.
Every day. Now I'm very interested in understanding, Anuj, what you were talking about. What's going to outstrip the exponential generation of data or data center explosion? I think at some point we are going to have to figure out where do you put the data. It may become a philosophical question, and we'll come to that later. But that says that growing popularity of Internet of Things, everything has a digital twin. So data creation rate has gone beyond exponential, I want to say, right? Now, knowing the data or knowing how much data is being generated is not necessarily going to mean much. if you don't know how to use it strategically, how to use it correctly. Just like oil, just sitting there, its data is called new oil, but just sitting there, it's not of much use. You got to figure out what's the value and how to use it correctly. And I think even that, it's a virtuous cycle. Data analysis and creation, it'll lead to new insights and possibly new data, and then more analysis. So it is sort of a perpetual cycle that is being generated, and that does create a lot of challenges for data managers. Let's say all of us who are trying to manage this. One is the sheer volume. I think I've said enough about that. Then all the traditional things that we used to worry about data, right? Governance, compliance, data ownership, data security. With the sheer volume, add performance of accessing that data to it. So how powerful your data centers are going to be, and how good the network around it is going to decide how well you'll access the data, how will you present it to customer, how well they absorb it, and how nobody likes to wait for more than a split second anymore for the data to. I mean, I move on. Attention span is less than a second. So all of these have always been, I think, performance and sheer volume adds another angle of challenge that will be there now. Access control, security, access control is always there. The last thing I want to add on to the challenges that we think about today is the unstructured data. And as much as data we are generating, but some unstructured data also means you're still losing some data. Not all of it is getting captured and being analyzed correctly. That is also something we worried about, as we see some papers still flying around possibly on the shop floor, or digitization has been done but not being used correctly, or it is a lot of unstructured data that you can't analyze still effectively. And last but not least, very relevant to the conversation we are having about location. Where is my data getting generated? Should I keep it on edge, processes there, make decisions right there, and not necessarily transfer it to a mega centralized thing that was just being talked about? What's the security aspects? Again, where do I store it? How long do I store it? Is it really needed? Right? Quintillion data, do I need to store it? So I think all of the data conversations are very contextual. Where to store it? What's the security aspect? Do I have to bring it somewhere else, or do I use it, make decisions, and move on? Along with all the traditional things that we've always worried about.
I love it, Richa, the way that you have explained it. You made it so easy to really understand. And the last point that you mentioned about the location, it is so true, from a security, and not only from a security point of view, also you said is how long do I need to store it? Is it forever? How many years? What is that period that we need to do? And that leads me to my next question to you, Richa, is that, many enterprises are moving their on-premises data centers to cloud. How do you see business planning their hosting strategy vis-a-vis DCs and cloud?
I very strongly believe that there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this. I have done it, been around for a while in the industry, and I've thought through this and tried to make business cases multiple times. And very, very clear answer is it depends. Bad answer, but that's true. And I'll elaborate a little bit on it, because the hosting strategy always has to be about what your requirement is. It's always contextual rather than generic, right? One has to consider the application for it. Who is going to access it? How much upfront investment do you want to make, or have you already made it? Timing, comes into play, of course. Upfront investment versus pay as you go, on surface may look like a much better model, but again, have you already made the investment? Then you have to live it out. So timing comes into picture. When you set up your infrastructure, it is time consuming. I think where cloud wins in a lot of places is, again, contextually, is where it comes to innovation and speed. Not having to set up things and having it ready, on-demand services and so on, it helps.
Yes.
Now the other side of it is compliance and control. So it's a balancing act always, and keeping in mind your requirements, and tying this up to data discussion we just had. Where do you generate, all this data that is being generated, all the smart things that an enterprise or user or your Fitbit or anything that is generating, where do you put that? If you really want to, the kind of insights we try and draw out of this sort of data, hyper personalization for my customer, because I know what you search on Google. I mean, I'll take our example. We know various aspects of a customer, right? We are in so much, we are a federated company and many industries. So I know you drive a car, you buy something off of firsttry.com. So I know you have a little one, you have a child at home. You love going to vacations because you are a resort customer for us. Now I want to analyze all this data and see what is this is a propensity model to offer you something else and then you biting on it. Now the kind of data you have to churn for that and the models you have to run on it, I would buy multiple supercomputers for that. And for a short time, I would run it for a short time, I'd run a marketing campaign and then I'll move on. For that kind of application as well, cloud becomes a more natural solutions. You want to run machine learning models and so on and so forth. The other side of it is if you were a bank, how much of data do you want to put out there? And do you really, now you're going to invest in the security? I think cloud, colo, everybody offers quite good security options now. So that's where you want to invest in, right? The most obvious things that come up between on-prem and cloud is like, if you have idle compute power sitting, then you would not necessarily go invest in it. You want extreme control over your data. And it is PII data, the governance and the rules of data, which we just talked about, right? I don't know what comes next when the Indian government picks it up and does the revision on it. What will it be? That might also decide where you put it. I do believe that most enterprises are recognizing that hybrid solution is really good, because you'll always have both kind of requirements, right? So it's an excellent option for especially large enterprises. If you're a small startup, I'll take a credit card and go on GCP or AWS or whatever and spin it up and start trying things out. But when you are a large organization and you are abiding by governance and rules and so on, I think hybrid solutions work very well. And I do believe my last point is edge and cloud conversations are going to become very real, very fast, very, very fast. The last but not the least at all is sustainability. Very large data centers. People like who you are in business of managing data centers, right? Versus me, I do have a data center and it's well managed, but I can't match the kind of investments you will make in making sure that you are keeping sustainability in front and center of your agenda. It is difficult for me. I try and do that, but it is difficult for me to match that level. So I think as Mahindra company and personally me and I think world at large now is looking at sustainability as a top agenda in everything we do. So that's another very, very important aspect that comes in when you're trying to decide data center versus cloud and where you're going to put your data.
Very pertinent point and very important point that Rucha, we had missed, which is on sustainability. And thank you for highlighting that. It is true is that the world is wanting to move to carbon neutral. And as a country, we've promised ourselves that we're going to be in the coming years become carbon neutral. So it is a very important point that we need to take cognizance of. And as the investments go, whether it is on cloud or on premises, one of the big things that everyone will need to take care is to ensure that there is long-term sustainability that we are incorporating as we invest.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Rucha. I'm going to change gears and Seema, I'm going to move to you. You are the CEO of BAM Digital Realty, which is the Brookfield's digital realty. So my question to you, Seema, is that most new developments are being planned for and are targeted at hyperscaler customers. Do you think that this could really create some stress amongst data center operators, given that hyperscaler strategy to build their own data centers?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. And second, just congratulations. It's a great report and to all the teams. And I would definitely like to look at it at more detail, right? So that's
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. Okay, so good questions. I'm gonna kind of wear my data center experience hat. So it's nothing to do with BAM Digital or something else. I've spent almost 8 years building, seeing nothing to where it is today. And I worked with one of the peers, was one of the largest data center provider for the country, right? So I was the business leader, pretty much a lot of planning. If you ask me today, my perspective on this question versus what I had way back in 2015, it was way different, right? So yes, everybody would latch on to this opportunity of building data centers for hyperscalers, easier, quick leasing velocity. Correct. What can you think of more? And the more the real estate you sell, the more the revenues you do, easier to service your debt. You just jump on that, right? I did that too, let me be honest. However, things are different today. Does it stress? The simple answer is kind of yes, because we kind of based all our growth story, all our strategy story on building data centers for hyperscalers. I don't know why so much of passion, but yes, people did that. But I'll tell you what, though digital realty is number 2 in the world, we are late in this country. I mean, I would say that we are not one of the early ones, right? So your strategy has got to be a little different. Now, how do you really mitigate this? How one should do it, anybody in the market, right? First of all, you have to choose your markets. It's very important to choose markets so that you mitigate. So you choose markets where the hyperscalers will move. You will have a hybrid strategy. You have enterprise, you have subsea, you have networks. So you can now build a product and define a product with value and not just build. I think it's glorified the real estate, with a little bit of a cooling solution if you just do a data center, BTS. And I find it very uninteresting. I'm so sorry about that. Right? So it's very important to build value. And what do you mean by value? I'm sure Richa and Charles had a fantastic, they did kind of say a lot of things in their, they kind of stated a lot of things. I'm just going to summarize that. Number one, I think we need to bring a lot of value from a network and interconnection standpoint. So we solve problems of latencies and the ability actually to be more agile on choosing the platform, whether it is build versus buy versus, on-prem versus, co-location, cloud and connectivities and so forth. These can be done easily by the data center providers. You know what, we don't focus on that so much and we should start doing that. The second most important thing for data center providers is not to become a face in the crowd and become a big problem. If the strategies change in those markets, then what do you do with the idle capacity? And let me tell you, it's a disservice to the country. On one hand, we talk about sustainability. On the other hand, we increase carbon footprints and consumption of utility, which is so precious for the country, just indiscriminately. So you have to say, even if the market is big, and if you think your capacity is going to just be another capacity without adding much of value, then you should look at new markets. So it's very important. So let me tell you, how I would do it if I were whatever. Right? I'm a CEO, so I'm going to kind of. So our vision is one, to build data centers that are highly interconnected oriented, highly network centric, and give you value of network so that you can really deploy any workloads that you want to in any form, which is very important. Number one. Number two, when we do our planning for data center, we just don't want to go and build just to be showing we're number one, number two in the country, but to really add value to those markets where right now the supply, it's underserviced market. Okay, underserviced market. There are a lot of upcoming markets and underserviced markets. So it's very important. In the upcoming, we want to be early movers, and in the underserviced markets, we want to put up an absolutely world-class facility with all these value-added stuff, right? Which is what is going to make a difference, and it's going to mitigate this risk. Secondly, I think it's a bad idea, if you ask me, to just have data centers as a build to suit for just hyperscalers. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but they have a strategy on where they want to lead and where they want to co-locate. So it's important to work, in a manner that we collaborate and complement well. It means you should complement even amongst your own peers instead of just making it a compete, because these are huge investments, they are infrastructure investments. And I heard Charles saying, I just want to, correct Charles, I'm so sorry about this, but you said the cost of debt goes lower. I am actually raising something, to really work very efficiently. And that's not quite true, right? It all depends on what part of the infrastructure is treated as priority. And digital infrastructure is important infrastructure, but at this moment, not in the priority sector. So it'll work differently. While yes, you do have incentives, right? So a short answer, yes, there'll be stress if you don't have the vision. The long answer is to strategize and look at how the market is moving. The market is moving in terms of digital growth, in terms of retail growth, in terms of digital payment growth, which are actually explosive markets from a data standpoint. So you should actually plan your infrastructures to suit those markets, which is the best way to mitigate your, in case, you end up with overcapacity. Yeah.
Beautifully explained, Seema. And Seema, one of the challenges that we are facing, and I know that you're facing as well, is securing the right land parcel. And it's becoming sort of increasingly challenging with the scarcity of suitable land parcels. And, the landowners' expectations have really skyrocketed when they hear the word data centers. So how are the operators like yourself mitigating this roadblock in your expansion strategy?
Who can answer this better than me? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you're right. So there are 3-4 strategies. Let me come straight to that. I shouldn't be eating into everybody's time. So one is, as you rightly said, we don't want to go into markets which are already very crowded. So important to look at markets that's there. Secondly, a very balanced strategy between core and edges. I think, Charles said that. So in India, let me tell you, edges can be as big as the early day cores themselves. Okay, you agree with me? It can be not really an edge of 2 megawatt, 3 megawatt, it could be a 10 megawatt edge. So it's another big opportunity, and I'm looking at those opportunities as well. Okay, so that's. The third is look at underserved markets, and it's very important to have a vision. It's not about monetizing for tomorrow, it's about building. See, any infrastructure is a long-term plan. It's not a plan for tomorrow, okay? So that's not what it is. So we are choosing those markets very, very carefully. I am actually encouraging my team to work very inclusive. I want all the IPCs, people who can really, from where we can source better. So it should not be, just a few of them. I would prefer to actually cover the market with as many I can. So I do have relationships I've inducted. So that's an important thing that we are doing. And we are constantly taking inputs and study from all quarters. You just don't make your own decisions just based on what others do. I think it's very important to really look at a long-term growth, where the country is going, how the country is headed, what kind of actually technologies is going to drive growth for data, and how this data is going to be served to its consumers, which are very important for us, right? Last but not the least, we're also watching the capacities of subsea that are being announced. Let me tell you, it won't be just Chennai and Bombay, and I can't reveal for them, but there are going to be capacities coming well beyond that, I'm sure. Look at Vijay just nodding away his head, he knows better. He keeps track of that. So these are going to be more than those cities. So 4 or 5 cities, which will become very, very important for tomorrow. So that's another thing which will help us, mitigate this, and not, continuity in business. So you don't have to just sit and wait for the land to materialize. I know that, right? So in some cities, yes, we do have people, more of these IPCs helping us. We create a pipeline. We run more HOTs than we would like to do. sometimes I have 3 or 4 parallel run what to do, because I don't know who's going to back out, and
Correct.
it's very, very difficult to acquire land. And I am on quite a few government committees, and as an independent advisor, fortunately, because I've been here for 30 years, a consistent face on IT and ICT, and so I do give a very constructive. I don't wear all these commercial and business hats, but I think I do as a very passionate citizen of this country to really, really do something in right sense, right? Whether it's renewable energy, in terms of banking, renewable energy, in terms of wheeling it, in terms of looking at how it will fit into the grid, how important it is to really conserve and don't have ambitious plan to become neutral carbon. Let me tell you, I'm a technologist, I'm a PhD computer science. It's not easy, 2030, you become carbon neutral. That's the dream that we have. And I don't want to dissuade the dream, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of hard work that has to go behind to become neutral even by 2030. That's also our vision. Right?
That's right.
But we will try and reduce the footprint as much as possible by embracing renewables. So it will, help in the overall run. So in net, there's a strategy how we want to mitigate and have a business continuity and not just sit and wait for things to change and become amenable, right?
Thank you, Seema. A lot of what you have said is, I know Vijay would agree with that. And thank you, Vijay, for being very patient. And thanks for your patronage as well. A couple of questions to you, Vijay. First is, how do you see the enterprise co-location demand stacking up vis-a-vis hyperscaler demand over the next 3 to 5 years?
So thanks, Anuj, for the invite, and pleased to be part of this excellent panel. And the views shared by the other panelists, I do agree with all of what they said, particularly the fact that data center is largely about how much network centric you are. I think that's a pretty important one. And second, the fact that enterprises, particularly large enterprises, will eventually look at a hybrid model. So I think these are two fundamentals. Now, I was very pleased to see in one of the foils of the report which you showed that the growth of hyperscalers in the next 3 years would be 35, and for the enterprise would be 65. I was actually a little surprised by that number because on the ground, I have statistics which are vice versa, but maybe the devil is in the details. So once you give us the benefit of reading the report, we'll be extremely happy to see that being true, that the enterprise growth in the next 3 years will be very high, because Vis-A-Vis as data center player has essentially been an enterprise data center player.
Nice.
In the last 5-6 years, the hyperscale demand has been so big that on a co-location model, their share of the total capacity consumption has been pretty high. And the current capacity build out, which I am seeing across the industry, not just Vis-A-Vis, across the industry, what I'm seeing is a good number of, a large quantum of capacity is actually signed up by the hyperscalers. So this 35-65 is a very pleasant statistic to me. We'll be extremely happy to see that happen. But I guess the 65, which you mentioned in the foil, is largely about enterprises coming and setting up private clouds in data centers like us. So if that happens, that's a very welcome sign. As I think Rucha was mentioning, the data center strategy for the enterprises is largely based on the kind of applications which they will eventually deploy. There'll be some application, they'll take it to third-party clouds. Certain application, they'll put it up on private clouds. But eventually it is going to be cloud. Eventually it's going to be cloud. So that way, I expect enterprise data center piece also to grow. And if you have noticed, today morning, the media carried a government's intention through the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, requiring all Indian enterprises who have financial records, accounting records, which are hosted outside India, to have a daily backup in India, daily backup. and I know a reasonably large number of enterprises across sizes who have their accounting records on the cloud,
Correct.
many of which are hosted in Singapore, Ireland, and other places. So with this notification having come today, it's a clear direction from the government that they are very serious about data localization. And this happened despite the fact that parallelly they were withdrawing the data protection bill to be reintroduced. So I think it's a very strong message they're sending out regarding data localization. So I think enterprise demand will grow, but I'm not able to honestly put a number on which one will grow faster than the other. Personally, I would like the statistic which you showed to happen. That's my personal wish. But currently, the capacities which are getting created on the ground under build 2022, 2023, it appears most of it is for the hyperscalers.
Let's hope, Vijay, that both of them grow. From your perspective, the enterprise co-location and the way that it seems on the ground, hyperscalers, demand growing. But you mentioned very pertinent points on the way the Indian government is thinking. On one side, whilst the bill needs to be reintroduced on the laws for data being onshore in India. And on the other hand, this morning's newspapers did carry that item where the backup for the financial companies every day of the data that they are storing elsewhere outside India needs to be done now on India, which clearly shows the direction in which the Indian government is wanting the data to come to India, and which is really good news as far as the data centers is concerned. Vijay, my sort of second and final question to you, with the increased interest of global data center operators in India, do you think there could be a potential oversupply situation or a potential consolidation opportunity in the future?
I don't see an oversupply to happen in the next 5 years. I don't see an oversupply.
Okay.
But there is a possibility where some of them might end up as single capacity operators, single facility operators, or facilities set up in locations which may not be very network friendly. I'm seeing some of the capacities coming up with that kind of a limitation. So those capacities which will be probably left out. So if you want to call them a surplus, I think they will definitely be there. I already know today as we speak, there are a couple of smaller capacities which are already being created last few years, which are idling. So I think as Seema was mentioning, the organization's ability to choose the data center location is extremely critical. And when people tell real estate operators will be able to come and participate, it's not so easy. It's not so easy because there's a lot of science which goes into the choice of the data center location and the ability to understand networks and the future networks which are coming up as well. So in that context, with some very mature players coming, global players coming, I'm sure they carry that knowledge. I don't see a oversupply happening at least for the next 5-6 years because the data consumption is also going to explode. And there'll be a lot of M2M data also which will get generated. So I don't see that situation. But will there be a consolidation happening after that? The answer is certainly yes. When people reach a capacity size of 100 to 150 megawatt, the growth rates will slow down. And around that time, there'll be a few players who will consolidate. My view for a country like India, and given its data generation, there's a market for at least 8 to 9 good data center operators. And we still don't have so many people yet.
Nice. That is very encouraging. And on a very encouraging note, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. A lot of discussions, with our panelists, right from the way digital growth is happening, edge, cloud, sustainability, hybrid strategy. I think Seema used this word, glorified real estate, agile, build, buy, co-location. What do you do with idle capacity? Again, going back, Rucha, to you and to Seema, sustainability, network-centric, Vijay, you also mentioned this, and ultimately, supply in underserviced markets. That's an interesting point, Seema, that you mentioned. And, hopefully we are not going to get into an oversupply situation, which, as you rightly said, is there aren't enough data center players at this moment in time. We've perhaps just embarked on the journey, and there is a huge amount of growth, the way Chuck laid it out, the way more mature markets have developed, the understanding on data centers. I think we have a little bit of a journey to traverse to be able to reach that maturity level. With this, we end our panel discussions. Thank you very much, Jeff, Chuck, Seema, Rucha, and Vijay for taking out the time to discuss on the data centers for India and at a global level, how you look at these data centers for India. Thank you very much, and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good night, and have a good day, Jeff and Chuck.
Take care.
Thanks.